on these islands, and there are fewer.
News.
Thank you for.
Officials say about 50 people were evacuated. BBC News.
Thank you for that news. Hello and welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service, live from Nairobi with Anne Soy, and I'm James Cotwell in London.
Coming up in this half hour, we'll bring you the latest from South Korea, where the former president, Yoon, has been found guilty in the first of 4 trials linked to his 2024 shock martial law decree.
We'll also stay with the developments in Venezuela and hear from the administration's ally Cuba. And we'll speak to a member of the opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado's political party. As ever, we welcome your messages. Our number for your WhatsApp and text messages is +44 7786 20 50 85.
Let's begin in Seoul, where the court session is underway. The sentencing of former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol is going on at the moment. We understand he's now been sentenced to 5 years in prison after he was found guilty over his failed attempt to impose martial law just over a year ago. Separately, he faces a number of other trials, including on charges of leading an insurrection, for which prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. His decree of martial law in December of 2024 was overturned within hours, but it threw South Korea into political turmoil and left the country deeply divided. We can now go to Seoul and speak to the correspondent at Korea Risk Group, Jun Ha Park. Welcome to Newsday. Just give us the latest from the court.
Hi, thanks for having me. So the South Korean court, the Seoul Central District Court's Criminal Division 35, presided over by the judge Baek Dae-hyun, they convicted Yoon of aggravated obstruction of official duties for interfering with efforts by this country's Corruption Investigation Office back in January last year for carrying out a court-approved arrest warrant at his presidential residence. So they have marked 5 years in prison for obstructing the execution of the arrest warrant. This does mark the first criminal verdict against him since he left office. There are, I believe there are 7 other trials that are still remaining, that remain a sentence for him.
So this is still something that is ongoing. But take us back to that martial law crisis in 2024 and walk us through what President Yoon did that led to his guilty verdict today.
Right, so the martial law on December 3rd, 2024, it came as a shock to the entire citizenship of this Republic of Korea. I believe it was about 10:30 p.m. When then President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law, citing pro-North Korean forces and also an alleged obstruction of the National Assembly by the opposition party, which was the Democratic Party of Korea at the time. And effectively what happened was that he sent martial law troops to the National Assembly to prevent them from nullifying the martial law and gathering, effectively breaching constitutional duties and also embarking on constitutional overreach. As of now, of course, he has been standing 8 trials that have put relation to his failed martial law attempt. These are still ongoing. We've only seen the first criminal verdict against him today. We saw a couple of days ago that prosecutors requested a death penalty sentence for him for actually imposing martial law in the first place. So these are still developments that are still going on.
Those actions led to deep divisions within the country, and some of those divisions still linger. Could this verdict heal wounds or perhaps make things even more polarized? How are they likely to be received in South Korea?
Well, it's quite certain that over 60% of the country still do believe that martial law was something that was unconstitutional and something that was wrong within our democratic safeguards and our democratic principles. So in the effect of polarization, sure that there has been political polarization through and through in this country. It was very much amplified within the period where Yoon's impeachment trial at the Constitutional Court was going on in the first half of last year. It still has gone on, but I think it has laid down to a certain point after the current president, Lee Jae-myung's election in June last year. So it's still uncertain of whether a court verdict such as this or corresponding court verdicts that will come in the foreseeable future will allay the concern of political polarization, also political divisions within this country that come into fruition. However, I do believe that this verdict and also the verdicts that will follow will definitely shape the public perception regarding whether martial law was indeed wrong and whether it is debatable on whether it is a right or a wrong case. Currently, the court's decisions that have come out thus far and the prosecutor's decisions of sentencing requests that have come out thus far have suggested that this is indeed undebatable and it was a wrong action by then President Yoon Suk-yeol to impose martial law on December 3rd, 2024.
Thank you very much. June Ha Park, their correspondent at the Korea Risk Group. Thank you for speaking to Newsday.
This is Newsday on the BBC World Service with Anne in Nairobi and James in London. The Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado says she has given her Nobel Peace Prize medal to President Donald Trump at a meeting at the White House. The meeting came after President Trump's military agreed an operation to seize Ms. Machado's rival, President Nicolas Maduro, in Caracas. Mr. Trump has not, however, apparently given his backing to Ms. Machado to take over.
That operation saw the Venezuelan leader taken to the U.S. to stand trial before a New York court. Though no Americans died in the operation, 32 Cuban officers were killed. Many of those were presumably protecting Maduro. The BBC's Will Grant was at the funeral of those officers in Cuba.
When they were deployed to the socialist ally of Venezuela, the 32 Cuban soldiers and intelligence officers could never have imagined they'd be the first Cubans to be killed by US troops since the Cold War. But after the US airstrikes on Venezuela and the forced removal of Nicolas Maduro from power, the cremated remains of the men were returned to their homeland with full military honours. On the tarmac to receive them was the 94-year-old Cuban revolutionary leader Raúl Castro in a rare public appearance. The remains, in small wooden boxes, were then transported in a funeral procession to the Armed Forces Ministry. First the grieving relatives, then the military, and then the public trooped past to pay their respects to the men the Cuban government calls fallen heroes who died fighting terrorists in imperial uniforms.
This has been a sobering moment for the Cuban Revolution. This is in essence the biggest loss at the hands of American troops since the Bay of Pigs, and that was in 1961. The actions in Venezuela are about potentially cutting off the flow of Venezuelan oil to Cuba, on which the Cuban Revolution depends.
Cuba will always survive because of Venezuela.
On the possibility of Venezuelan crude drying up, President Trump spoke to the interim Venezuelan leader, Delcy Rodriguez, this week, and later described her as a terrific person. For the time being, he's keeping up the pressure on the communist-run island.
Cuba looks like it's ready to fall. I don't know how they can hold that. But Cuba now has no income. They got all of their income from Venezuela.
On the streets of Havana, many people didn't want to talk politics at this sensitive moment, but those who were prepared to speak dismissed President Trump's claim that the island was about to fall. Cuba is a very persistent country which has always risen to its challenges over the years and kept moving forward, said taxi driver Giovanni Fonseca. Things will remain normal here here, he insists. It's absurd what Trump says. People here are prepared to stand up and fight, said this state employee. Donald Trump should first fix the problems in his own country. Then he should come here, talk to the people and see things with his own eyes, like Obama did, adds the small business owner Felipe Cortina. This moment of heightened tension between the US and Cuba has been compared to the Bay of Pigs, when CIA-backed Cuban exiles attempted to invade the island to remove Fidel Castro from power. 88-year-old Victor Dreque led 2 companies of Cuban troops that day, and insists Cuba wouldn't buckle if it were to happen again. If the US tries to invade, they'll stir up a hornet's nest, he said. They'll never see our combatants coming, men and women. Would you pick up a rifle yourself, I asked him. Of course I would, he answers. If not, the Americans would string me up from a post. The revolutionary fervour aside, this has been a troubling time for Cubans. The loss of 32 Cuban soldiers, many at the hands of elite American troops. The loss of a critical ally in Nicolas Maduro. And the potential loss of a regular flow of Venezuelan crude oil. For the continued longevity of the Cuban Revolution, that last one might be the biggest loss of all.
Will Grant reporting from Cuba there. Let's get a little bit more on the Venezuelan angle to all of this. As you heard in Will's piece, President Trump has called the new interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, a terrific person, and that the 2 countries are now getting along very well. But could that handover of the Nobel Peace Prize medal by Maria Corina Machado to the president have changed Mr. Trump's mind? Joining us now in the studio is Luis Aparicio of the UK branch of the Vente Venezuela party, that is Maria Corina Machado's party. Welcome back.
Good morning.
Good morning. So first of all, do you know what was discussed in the meeting with President Trump?
There are a number of things were discussed. Is mainly at around the political prisoners that are in Venezuela still at the moment. Still only less than 7% have been released, and with still they have restrictions as to they cannot speak to the press. They have to report to the police every single day, so they're not free. They're on the license.
Are some of these political prisoners people that you know personally?
Yes, but not the main ones. Yeah, every single one that's released. Obviously, they're better being at home than being in prison, and being in prison in Venezuela is not like being in prison in the UK. You are there with 20, 30 people in one small room, less than this.
So tough conditions for prisoners. What else do you think? Presumably she wants greater personal support from President Trump.
That was discussed. Clearly I don't have the details, but we are discussing a transition in Venezuela.
Okay, what would that entail from your perspective? What would your party like to see?
Right now we are looking towards the election, getting organised to do that. So that's the main objectives that we have at the moment. But right now is the release of all the prisoners in Venezuela.
Okay. We saw Maria Corina Machado say that she had given her Nobel Peace Prize medal to President Trump. When she won it, she was clear that it was a tribute to the suffering of the Venezuelan people. Doesn't it seem then strange to hand it over to President Trump?
No, because it's something that obviously we are in deep gratitude to what has happened. You've got to understand that it's been 27 years of a dictatorship, and we've been trying to remove them from power democratically, and they didn't want to. So the only way this was done was because of the intervention of Donald Trump. So, that is her way to say thank you very much.
When we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you were optimistic that President Trump would swing his support behind Maria Corina Machado. It doesn't seem to be happening, though, does it?
She was there yesterday, so I would disagree with what you just said. They are discussing, obviously, very sensitive situations at the moment in Venezuela, and they decided for it to be private for obvious reasons.
But he also said that Delcy Rodriguez, the interim president, the acting president, replacing Nicolas Maduro, but from his political movement, was a terrific person, and that the country was doing well, that she was responding to what America wanted.
She's useful, obviously, but we've got to dismantle a regime, and that is the best way that he feels that this has to be done or can be done. You have to understand that they have still the arms in Venezuela and control the arms. So they believe clearly that this is the better strategy, and it is working.
Mm. So what do you see coming next then?
Well, next, it needs to be, as I said, the release of the 1,000 prisoners that is in there. And after that, we really are doing one day at a time with regards to this. Once we pass that, then we will see where the land lies and see what we can do.
But I mean, you mentioned elections, for example. Elections happened relatively recently, but controversially, as Maduro announced as the victor, many countries, including the US, didn't accept those results. Do you call for elections to be held in a short space of time, or do you think that's a process that could take longer?
It will take a little time if we are all realistic in relation to the timing and the systems and so on. Just to give you context, when the election happened, it happened under their rules. And this is really a case in point that I believe the whole world should look at. You know, how to actually counteract a government that is going to steal your elections, and we still want it, in spite of all the problems that we had. Now, they did not allow nearly 9 million people to vote, which is a third of the electorate of Venezuela. So if we won them by 70%, we'll get 99% on the electorate.
Luis Abrisa, thank you very much indeed, from the UK branch of Venezuela Party, Karina Machado. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's now cross to Rabat, where Isaac Fenin is there for us ahead of the finals of the Africa Cup of Nations. Isaac.
Yeah, good morning to you. And hosts Morocco are one win away from claiming the country's first Africa Cup of Nations title for 50 years. The Atlas Lions facing Senegal in Sunday's final. They've invested huge amounts of money into football, using it as a tool for societal and cultural change over more than a decade, with King Mohammed VI playing a pivotal role. Every host claims they will put on the best AFCON ever, but how has the tournament gone? Do people think it's been worth the cost? BBC Sport Africa's Ian Williams reports from Rabat.
Wherever the Africa Cup of Nations finds its home, the colours and the sounds never change. Here, Morocco have been successful on the pitch. What about off it? I'm going on a journey around Rabat to find out. First, in a taxi.
Casbah, please.
Hi. Yes.
My driver Eunice tells me local taxi drivers were preparing months in advance, giving hundreds of drivers English lessons. Like other cities, the putty taxis here, all painted a royal blue, are in a battle with app-based firms, but business has still been good.
It was a big difference between the normal day and in this event. We receive a lot of foreign people from Africa, from Europe, from America, a lot of countries.
Thank you very much, Eunice.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Eunice drops me at the Medina. I want to know if people there have also been winning. Hassan has a stall in a great location on the edge of the main square at the market entrance, decked with shirts, hats, flags and even replica trophies. It's mostly Moroccan colours, but other countries appear as well.
We have sold thousands of items and the demand is high. We would like 32 countries to participate in the next competition to increase our sales. If Morocco wins the AFCON this year, we will give away our products as gifts for free.
Next up, the AFCON branded tram, a ride which takes me to the fan zone, where we bumped into Youssef, a student working on the trams, helping visitors find their way to stadiums.
There is a very big difficulties, but I think we did it, and I see people happy. We have hospitality. We are Moroccans, the people who comes from the other countries like this competition.
The Atlas Lions are hosting AFCON for the first time since 1988, but playing in the Moroccan winter means conditions haven't been ideal. The first few weeks were very wet, but the pitches held up, something which pleased Omar Kayari from the Royal Moroccan Football Federation, which has invested in new and upgraded stadiums ahead of co-hosting the 2030 World Cup.
We're tremendously happy about our technology, and we are very happy also because it shows to the world that sometimes Africa can do it better than other countries. And lastly, and maybe the more important, all of this technology is from Moroccan companies.
Organisers told me they're happy with ticket sales, which are up on Ivory Coast 2 years ago. But we did witness supporters sometimes having issues getting in amid strict crowd control. Of course, one of the names fans were desperate to see was Egypt's Mohamed Salah. After the quarter-finals, he described Morocco as his favourite tournament and praised the organisation. Last year's Gen Z protests showed there is discontent with some of the investment around football, but the new railway station outside the Prince Moulay Abdallah Stadium has eased traffic congestion on match day. As fans here on the final leg of our journey pour out of its sleek new glass entrance, do they think AFCON has been worth the money?
We're really proud to be Moroccan in 2026 and to host the African Cup of Nations. It's incredible. One have to live it to understand.
There aren't benefits, but with the time I think that it will be good.
I think it's bringing a lot of attention in Morocco, bringing a lot of investment, so I think it's a very good thing.
While hosting AFCON comes at a cost for these fans, victory in Sunday's final will be worth every dirham if it ends 50 years of hurt.
BBC Sport Africa's Ian Williams reporting from the back, of course you heard from Newsday's Isaac Bannon too. Let's get a little bit of business news. Canada and China are testing a reset in ties. Prime Minister Mark Carney has met President Xi Jinping in Beijing to talk trade. Our business presenter Archana Shukla joins us from Mumbai, and after years of tension, is this the start then of a real thaw between the two countries?
Well, the effort seems real, James, because the need is very dire for the two countries. US is disrupting economic and political alliances across the world, and, old foes and friends are trying to come together and form ties. And especially amidst very high tariffs for Canada, Canada is looking to double its export to non-US partners. And at the end of the day, China is its second largest economic partner, although in terms of value and volume, US still is the much larger. But for China also, from this perspective, it kind of, is trying to prove to the world that it's a more reliable partner, and getting a deal with Canada brings it into more influence in a country which is literally at the doorstep of America. But in large parts, it all comes down to business. It's really a sales pitch by Carney here. Carney's looking at the big consumption basket in China to sell more agriculture products, energy products. We know that China sources a large part of its crude oil from Canada. Yeah. That's one segment. Agriculture is another area that they would want to be working together on.
Business presenter Archana Shukla, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to Newsday.
Distribution of the BBC World Service in the U.S. is made possible by American Public Media, producer and distributor of award-winning public radio content. Engaging audiences, creating meaningful experiences, and fostering conversations. APM, American Public Media, with support from Ninja One, helping organizations simplify endpoint management to automate IT and strengthen security, all from one platform. More at ninjaone.com.
Hi, I'm Bill Curtis from Wait, Don't Tell Me. It's the NPR News Quiz, where we make fun of the news and chat with funny people like Hassan Minhaj, too.
Your parents were not up for you being a comic.
Yeah, they weren't really into it, but that's because they loved me.
Right, exactly. They wanted what's good for you.
Make your parents proud by staying up to date on the news with Wait, Don't Tell Me.
Saturdays and Sundays at 10 a.m. on News 88.7.
Hello, welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service with Anne Soy in Nairobi. I'm James Conwell in London.
Polls are closed in Uganda, where President Museveni is seeking a 7th term. We'll look at the conduct of the vote.
We'll find out why the African Union is pushing for maps to portray Africa in its full and actual size.
And Newsday's Isaac Fennin is in Morocco looking forward to the Africa Cup of Nations final. But first, this news.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. South Korea's former president Yoon Suk-yeol has been convicted of a series of charges over his failed attempt to impose martial law just over a year ago. They include abuse of power and obstruction of justice. The court said he had plunged South Korea into political crisis and sentenced him to 5 years in prison. Mr. Yoon still faces other charges, including leading an insurrection. Donald Trump has thanked the Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado for presenting him with her Nobel Peace Prize medal, but he did not endorse her to govern Venezuela. President Xi Jinping has expressed optimism about China's improving ties with Canada. He was speaking as he hosted talks in Beijing with the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney after almost a decade of strained relations. The United States and Taiwan have signed a trade agreement that reduces import taxes on goods from the island. In return, Taiwanese tech firms will invest $250 billion in the U.S. Protests have continued over the presence of thousands of armed immigration officers in the U.S. city of Minneapolis. President Trump has threatened to deploy troops using the Insurrection Act. The European Union's border agency says the number of irregular crossings into the EU fell by a quarter last year compared with the previous 12 months. The biggest fall was in the number of people leaving West Africa. Researchers have developed a new map of the land beneath Antarctica's ice sheet, revealing thousands of previously undiscovered hills and ridges. The scientists say it could indicate how the continent will respond to global warming. And emergency services are tackling a large fire in the South Korean capital Seoul. It broke out in a slum area. BBC News.
Thank you, Neil, for that news. Hello and welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service, live from London. I'm James, and from Nairobi with Anne. Hi, Anne.
Hi, James. In this half hour, we'll bring you the latest on the elections in Uganda, hear from the UK Foreign Secretary about Europe's defence, and find out why the African Union is backing a campaign to correct the map of the world.
Love to get your thoughts on those stories. Our text and WhatsApp number is +44 7786 20 50 85.
Let's begin this half hour in Uganda, which has just held its general elections, but the vote took place against a backdrop of restrictions on civil society. Days before polling, the government ordered several human rights organizations to suspend their operations. The authorities cited regulatory concerns, while critics warned that the move would limit independent scrutiny at a critical moment. I'm now joined by Anthony Masake, a human rights lawyer in Kampala. Welcome to Newsday. First of all, you ran an organization, but which was suspended just days before the elections. How did that affect your ability to monitor the polling and voting rights?
Thank you so much, Anne, for having me. So 2 days ago, or 2 days before the elections, we received a letter from the NGO Bureau, which is the government regulator for NGOs in Kampala or in Uganda. And that letter required us to immediately cease operations to allow time for investigations. And alongside us, there are 9 other organizations that work around press freedom, anti-torture work, and other activities that are critical to the election period. So
what investigations?
So the letter was extremely vague in the way it was worded, because they accused us and the other 9 civil society organizations of engaging in activities that are prejudicial to the security and to the laws of Uganda. So they don't list what those activities are, and we were never given an opportunity to be heard, because I think if we were, we would certainly clarify on any misunderstanding that may be there. And so that vagueness is what is deeply disturbing, and the fact that we were never given an opportunity to be heard. But what we know now is that this move was deliberate as a preemptive measure to frustrate or to silence the work of civil society organizations during these elections. And we of course disturbed that some of the critical work that we do, for example, provision of pro bono legal assistance or representation to human rights defenders, such as journalists and lawyers who are targeted because of their work, has now been affected because as Chapter 4 Uganda, we cannot now go to court to represent human rights defenders or journalists if they are targeted because of their work. We have also been affected and impeded in terms of our general counsel support to civil society organizations, and this of course then exposes many organizations to such type of adverse actions.
But were you able to work as an independent human rights lawyer to go to the polling stations to try and monitor what was happening?
So under our laws, you cannot go to a polling station as an individual or even as an institution if you have not been accredited by the Electoral Commission as an election observer. And that is part of the concerns, of course, that we have, because to approach a polling station and be very close to meaningfully observe an election, you need to have accreditation from the Electoral Commission. And if the permit of the organization has been suspended, it therefore means that you can't get close access to meaningfully observe these elections. And that, of course, then in return affects the quality of the elections that we are talking about. So whether as an individual or an organization without election observer status from the Electoral Commission, it's unlawful for you to get too close. You'd actually not have the access, because once you get close, they will want an accreditation letter from the Electoral Commission, which in turn, of course, would not be there. And that then, of course, would impede your ability to observe the elections.
And how does the suspension affect the other activities that you have been involved in, observing the conduct of the campaigns in the run-up to the elections? There have been reports of the arrest of opposition supporters and some other violations, allegations of violations against especially opposition supporters.
So at the time when we received this suspension, we were actively engaged in the provision of legal services for, I think, about 15 human rights defenders and other opposition supporters who we consider to be pro-democracy actors. And this suspension means that we do not now have the resources or the status as an institution to go to court to represent our clients. That's the first thing, because the letter has suspended all our activity. The second thing is we usually conduct what we call legal compliance clinics, which are pro bono legal assistance services to civil society organizations to help them improve their corporate governance standards and to comply with the law. And that sort of work requires facilitation for staff or lawyers to travel across the country to provide these services. Now, with the closure of our offices, we cannot provide that support as well. We cannot also effectively monitor the human rights violations that occur across the country, because you need to access your bank accounts and you need to be able to function as an organization to be able to carry out this human rights monitoring work. So all disrupted.
Thank you very much, Anthony Masake, a human rights lawyer based in Kampala.
The British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper has told the BBC that the Western Defence Alliance NATO should double down on Arctic security to defend the region from Russian aggression. On a visit to British forces in northern Norway, She said the alliance should establish a combined operation known as Arctic Sentry to defend the region, just as it does in the Baltic Sea. She also said allies, including the United States, should unite around the shared threat, despite continuing disagreements over Greenland. A diplomatic correspondent, James Lander, was travelling with the Foreign Secretary and sent this report.
We're in the air now, flying in helicopters with the Foreign Secretary deep into the mountains where the British Armed Forces conduct a lot of their training. And from this vantage point in the air, you can once again get a sense of just how hostile this terrain is. It is very cold, very harsh outside. This is a place where armed forces need to train because they have to get used to it. And if the Arctic is going to become a new geopolitical battleground, this kind of military expertise is going to be out of reach.
It is these mountains in the Norwegian Arctic, not Greenland, that NATO commanders see as the real front line with Russia, protecting the seaways south to the Atlantic. As he briefed the Foreign Secretary, Brigadier General was frank in his assessment.
We're at peace, and we see ourselves and then continue as war and relate to peace of the other in the market. So we are somewhere in that continuum.
Out of the war briefing room, boarded all-terrain vehicles with caterpillar tracks and headed up through the snow to see British and Norwegian troops engaged in extreme cold weather training.
So we're walking through the hills now. There are armoured vehicles, both Norwegian and British Marines, putting on, I have to say, it's a sort of photo op that I haven't seen the like of. In the middle of nowhere, they've got demonstration, they've got weapons on show, skidoos. They're showing the Foreign Secretary how they stay alive here, how they fight, how they keep warm. It's bitterly cold. The moment anybody takes their gloves off or their hats, they're told immediately by the media handlers to put it back on, because the risk of getting cold here is huge. You notice also that the soldiers are constantly moving, constantly rolling their arms, stamping their feet. This is not a place to stand still. You can get cold very quickly.
In all, there are more than 1,000 UK troops, most of the Royal Marines, training here, with plans to double their number in a few years, something the Foreign Secretary told me should be emulated by other allies.
Double down through NATO on our Arctic security to do other areas to make sure we strengthen security.
NATO, she said, should establish a new operation known as Arctic Sentry to defend the region just as it has done in the Baltic Sea in the wake of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
We want to see the same kind of approach at Arctic Sentry, which is about coordinating the intelligence, the cooperation, the security work that we do across all of our allies.
But how could that work if the United States and Europe were at odds over Greenland, with Donald Trump threatening to annex the Danish territory?
There have obviously been disagreements in the discussions that they have had yesterday, but where I think there is shared agreement is about this Arctic security, this broader threat.
The Foreign Secretary was accompanied by her Norwegian counterpart, Espen Barth Eide. He welcomed the discussions about setting up Arctic Sentry, saying it would demonstrate a serious commitment to tackling the Russian threat in the High North. But...
And how worried about the between Denmark and
Put it this way, 2 days ago I was in a shelter in Kiel and I engaged with the highest leadership in Ukraine in several meetings. I think we should try to avoid the distractions from what is issue number one these days. We need to help Ukraine to get well out of this war, to get to a just and lasting peace, because that matters to transatlantic and European security more than anything else.
So Europe is doing more to address Arctic security. But will that matter if Donald Trump's interest in Greenland is less about security and more about natural resources?
James Landale reporting. You're listening to Newsday from the BBC with James and Anne. A reminder now of the main headlines this hour. A South Korean court has found the former president Yoon Suk Yeol guilty of obstructing justice and abuse of power in the first of several cases over his imposition of martial law, sentencing him to 5 years in prison. And the Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has given her Nobel Peace Prize medal to President Trump, but there's no sign she's secured his likely the president countries in his name. And China's President Xi Jinping has even telephone ties during a visit by the Canadian Prime Minister.
To the end of the tournament, James, on Sunday, Senegal and Bangkok. The final of the competition is the third final for the tournament competitions. Let's hear from the Senegalese fan.
Hello to the entire organization. My name is Boy Maron, better known as Yamusafa. I'm a Senegalese influencer and content creator at the same time as the supporter of Senegal national team. Frankly, here in Tanja, we are preparing this year like international holiday. Lion Jesse are already ready. The flag are out of the neighborhoods and everyone is thinking about Senegal on March 6th of Florida Days. Egypt, for our part, as an artist supporter, the days are different. Senegal and Morocco are brothers country. They will play the game in February and May the best week. In Senegal, we organize ourselves with friends and family. We prepare food, tea, tuba, coffee, and everyone is looking for a good place to flow the game. There is a lot of respect for Morocco, but we have confidence in our players. The Lions are focused, people are behind them, and we hope to finish this African Cup in style. May the best win. And Senegal go. Allez Senegal, allez Senegal.
It's really going to be an interesting final. It was so brilliant to be amongst all those Senegal fans in Tangier. It'll be interesting to see how they travel here to Rabat to watch their team. Joining me on the line is Mali head coach Tom Samphy. Tom, your team faced Senegal in the quarterfinals in Tangier. You had to deal with the Senegalese fans in that stadium. There were so many of them, but you managed to cause some problems though, didn't you?
Yeah, we faced both families. We faced Morocco. The best of Senegal in Morocco, and it's fantastic. Yeah, we got us to 14 minutes of red card, but till the last seconds of the game, we were very competitive and we lost it only 1-0. We had some chances to equalize. We were on the bad side of luck that day. But Senegal is a strong team. For me, it's not a surprise they played the final. To be honest, both teams, Morocco and Senegal, are teams who deserve to play there because it's not a one-time success team. It's built over years by federations who are constructed, building their federation in the organization, in development. So for me, it's not a surprise this final.
Yeah, as you mentioned, you played both of these teams. Morocco, you drew with them early on in the competition, and Senegal, you were unfortunately on the end of a defeat. What do you think is the strongest elements of both teams, and where are the weaknesses as well?
They are both a little bit similar. They are very complete on every position. They have top goalkeeper, top defenders, top midfield players, top strikers, and even very good players on the bench who can substitute them. Contrary to some other teams who have maybe top strikers or top midfield players, but not the whole complete package. And both have a very complete team. Morocco has maybe not the right way to the goal to get founded, but very, very funny to see Morocco conceded only one goal in the whole tournament in the previous 6 matches. And Senegal, they are very direct in their play. They have with Jackson, with Mane, with Ndiaye, a lot of offensive force, and they play very direct forward. So it will be a very open game, I think. It will be a very interesting game. Both teams very complete, and it will be a battle, and it's very tough to say who's going to win.
I mean, these finals, they tend to be very tense. We saw in the semi-finals, they weren't the best spectacles, they weren't the best games, but they were incredibly tense and they were incredibly dramatic. What type of game do you expect to see on Sunday?
Yeah, but don't forget, it's long ago that the top 8 countries, the last 8 were really top nations, with Egypt, with Morocco, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Mali was the top country there. So it makes it very competitive. The difference between each team is very little, and it will be decided in details. The same will happen on Sunday in the final, where the host is supported by a full crowd and has an advantage in decisions of referees, but have also brilliant players. Where Senegal has a lot of experience of playing finals, contrary to Morocco. Morocco, it's 50 years ago that they won the title. The pressure is more on Morocco maybe than on Senegal. Senegal can play more free, is more experienced than that. So I think it's tough to say what will decide, but it will be details. It will be done. A 1-0 or something like that, and maybe we go also again to extra time.
Okay, cool. So if I had to put a gun to your head and say what the score is going to be, of course I'm not doing that, but if I had to force you to give me a prediction, what would you say?
I hope there's no bullet in it. But
no, of course not.
No. For me, it's very tough to say. It's really almost impossible to choose between both. Both are very strong. I think we go to extra time, and why not? We will finish with penalties, and the most lucky one will win.
My colleague James wants to ask you a question.
Yeah, hi. I wondered what your thoughts were on the refereeing. We've seen quite a lot of criticism from some countries that Morocco has been getting a bit of an advantage from the referees. Obviously, they would strongly deny that. What do you feel about the standard of refereeing throughout the tournament?
Yeah, it's tough for me to comment on that. We got 3 red cards. We got more than 10 yellow cards in 5 games. So we were not really on the advantage of decisions. To be honest, the majority of the decisions the referees took against us were correct. Some decisions with VARs, with penalties or no penalty, it was incorrect. But I never want to blame referees. It's very tough to take decisions right in this time. And yeah, people can make mistakes. I think everyone can make mistakes, coaches, players, but also referees. Great tournament, fantastic organized, a lot of fans, top stadiums, top grass pitches, great infrastructure, and I think let's focus on that and less on the referees.
Tom, always as ever, great chatting to you. Tom Sanfit, the Mali head coach there, he's right, it will be a very, very intriguing final on Sunday. We'll bring you more coverage throughout the programme on Newsday.
Isaac Van, thank you very much indeed, speaking to us live there from Morocco. Just wanted to read you a quick news flash coming in from the Reuters news agency. They are giving us some partial figures from those elections in Uganda. And the Election Commission say that so far Yoweri Museveni has around 76% of the votes counted, and the main challenger Bobi Wine is around 20%, according to Reuters, though that is of course partial early results. Significantly distorts the size of continents.
precisely is the fact that how Africa has been represented in that map, the scale, the dimension, and the fact that it really is depicted as a fraction of what it is in reality, proportionally to the rest of the world.
Why does it matter? Why has the African Union gotten behind this campaign?
It matters precisely because it helps to expose accurately the dimension, the scale, and the magnitude of a number of elements. First, the magnitude of what the African countries have been trying to achieve through their development projects. Let me give an example. If you look at, for instance, the Trans-Saharan Highway that links Algiers to Lagos, 4,500 kilometers, knowing that an average of $500,000 to $6 million are needed to build 1 kilometer in Africa, depending on the terrain. Or, for instance, the Lapset Corridor.
The Lapset Corridor is in Eastern Africa.
Exactly.
It's supposed to connect to Eastern Africa.
Exactly, Eastern Africa. You would understand the scale of the investments, the achievements, but also the challenges. So projecting correctly the map helps to bring answers to some of the questions, which is what do we need? How much do we need? What do we need to mobilize in terms of investments? And what it takes from African countries in terms of resources? What it takes for African countries in terms of efforts for mobilization, for blended finance from their own resources, their private sector resources, but also international partners' resources. So this correct projection of Africa's dimension as compared to the entire globe helps to really understand what it involves, what it takes, what has been achieved, what is still yet to be achieved.
Some would say the African Union is backing a campaign that, it doesn't bring food to the table, to be honest. And yet there are many challenges that the continent is facing, from security to political instability. What do you say to that?
This point of view, in fact, has been voiced, but I will simply have as an answer. If you look at the challenges the continent is facing, from development to peace and security, and if you look at these challenges without having into perspective the interlinkages, meaning the link that exists between the peace and security and development, and the fact that through a correct projection that entails proper planning, accurate evaluation of means and resources needed to achieve developmental projects and mobilization of resources, if you don't, and also integration, if you don't create that link with the well-being of the continent and the peoples of the continent, you cannot address the security situation, for instance, that without the development aspect, you cannot achieve much in terms of peace and security, and vice versa. So the idea of collective perception, replacing plan, for instance, we are in our sense with the enablement to address some of the challenges.
That's Selma Haddad from the African Commission. This is
Houston Public Media is a service of the University of Houston and is to the Houston Public Media Foundation. More information available online at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate.
If you feel like people on the other side of the political divide are on Mars, Left, Right, and Center helps you understand where they're coming from. We invite people from the left and the right to our show each week, and we unpack our political differences, not to smooth them over, but to bring clarity to what's really at stake. I'm David Green, and I'm excited to bring Left, Right, and Center to Houston. Join me Sundays at 5 p.m. on News 88.7 and online at houstonpublicmedia.org.
This is your NPR station, KUHF Houston, News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston. Get local and breaking news anytime at houstonpublicmedia.org. Listen to us on your favorite devices. Tell your smart speaker to play News 88.7.
Hello and welcome to Newsday on the BBC World Service with Anne Soy in Nairobi and James Cocknell in London.
South Korea's impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol has been sentenced to 5 years in prison in the first of 4 trials relating to his failed martial law bid in 2024. We'll speak to a Korean MP.
The Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has turned over her Nobel Peace Prize medal to President Trump, but will she get his support? We'll speak to our correspondent.
And as Iran's brutal crackdown and internet shutdown continues, President Trump's decision on military action still remains to be seen. We'll hear from an Iranian activist.
And I'm Isaac Fannin here in Rabat as we get ready for the climax of the Africa Cup of Nations. The final between Morocco and Senegal will bring you coverage throughout the programme, all after the latest world news.
BBC News with Moira Alderson. The former president of South Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol, has been convicted of a series of charges over his failed attempt to impose martial law just over a year ago. They include abuse of power and obstruction of justice. The court sentenced him to 5 years in jail. Jake Kwon is outside the court in Seoul.
It's very loud here because I'm standing in front of hundreds of Yoon supporters who are chanting and they're saying, "Release Yoon," and they're saying that this is not going to go away. And we just heard that from his defense team that they are going to appeal. Now, today's decision have a lot of implications for the 7 other trials that he's facing. The biggest one, the leading the insurrection, carries penalties up to death. Of course, death penalty is only on paper in South Korea, so in practice, that is a life sentence. But after what we heard today, it really does seem like Mr. Yoon's chances of avoiding such punishment for leading an insurrection seems really slim.
The Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has given her Nobel Peace Prize medal to President Donald Trump at a meeting at the White House. Mr. Trump thanked her on social media. He's declined to endorse Ms. Machado as Venezuela's new leader. Our North America editor Sarah Smith has this report.
Donald Trump was clearly infuriated when Maria Corina Machado was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in October for her efforts to try to restore democracy to Venezuela. He believes the award should have been his. So as part of her attempt to persuade him to allow free and fair elections in her country, Ms. Machado told reporters she handed the gold medal over to Mr. Trump. President Trump has so far shown much more interest in Venezuela's vast oil reserves than he has in reviving democratic elections. He's working closely with Delcy Rodriguez, the former deputy to Nicolas Maduro, who's now the acting president of Venezuela.
President Xi Jinping has expressed optimism about China's improving ties with Canada during talks in Beijing with the Canadian Prime Minister. Mark Carney is facing a difficult balancing act after years of strained relations with China. Again, he's in Beijing.
Diplomatic relations between the two nations fell apart in 2018 when Canada arrested a Chinese business executive wanted in the US. China retaliated and detained 2 Canadian citizens, keeping them in harsh conditions. As the two leaders shook hands at the Great Hall of the People, President Xi described it as a turnaround of ties. For Beijing, this visit is an opportunity to get closer to a neighbour and key partner of the US.
The United States and Taiwan have reached a trade agreement that reduces import taxes on goods from the island, while increasing Taiwan's technology investment in the United States. Washington's Commerce Department said tariffs on most Taiwanese goods will be lowered from 20 to 15%. BBC News. The former president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, has been transferred to a special detention unit within the feared Papuda Maximum Security Jail. He was previously held in police facilities following his conviction for trying to overturn the result of the 2022 presidential election. His new prison accommodation is larger than his previous cell. It features a kitchen and a private outdoor area. Mr. Bolsonaro's lawyers had argued he should be held under house arrest because of health problems. The European Union's border agency says the number of irregular border crossings into the EU fell by a quarter last year compared with the year before. Simon Jones reports.
Almost 178,000 people were found crossing into the EU
Officials say close to 200 people are thought to have lost their homes. The cause of the fire is not yet known. The area is reported to be due for redevelopment. Scientists have developed a new map of the land beneath Antarctica's ice sheet, revealing thousands of previously undiscovered hills and ridges. Until now, scientists have known less about the landscape beneath the kilometres thick ice than about the surface of some planets. Understanding the topography under Antarctica's ice might help scientists work out just how the ice might retreat in a warming climate. BBC News.
Thanks for that news. Hello and welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service, live from Nairobi with me and Soy, London with James Copnell, and from Rabat, the venue of Sunday's Africa Cup of Nations final. Isaac Fenton is there for us, and we'll be crossing to him in just about 10 minutes.
First, we'll go to Sambil to hear about the sentencing. Former president. Prosecutors also seeking the death penalty for some of the other charges he's facing.
We also have updates on Venezuela and Iran. As ever, we'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the stories we're covering. Our text and WhatsApp number is +44 70 86 20 50 85.
The former president of South Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol, has been found guilty over his failed attempt to impose martial law just over a year ago. The charges included abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and sentenced him to 5 years in prison. Separately, Mr. Yoon faces a number of other trials, including on charges of insurrection. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. Originally said death penalties are never in practice carried out in South Korea. His decree of martial law in December 2024 was overturned within hours, but through South Korea, that has left the country deeply divided. So let's head to the National Assembly in Seoul and speak to Hyun Do-choi, an opposition MP from the party former President Yoon was part of before he was suspended. Welcome to Newsday. What is your reaction to this guilty verdict?
Yes, it is widely expected. It's just the beginning of the former President Yoon's the trial. He has also 3 others not related trials. So we are expecting the insurrection charge, the verdict of insurrection charge in the coming weeks. So it's just the beginning. So and we have widely expected that this charge also could be like this.
When you say you expect it, do you accept that it was the correct verdict?
Yes, partly. And but Mr. Yoon, the former President Yoon, has claimed that his trial, that the investigator had no legal basis to probe and arrest him in the first place, because literally speaking, Korean Constitution has a clause that the president's prerogative right to declare the martial law, but already the constitutional code has had a verdict, but his declaration of martial law is not valid, is not based on the constitution, and is not based on the relevant law itself. So everybody in Korea, the political scene, it can be easily expected to be the guilty verdict.
Does a trial like this, and as you say, there are other trials to come, put an end to this crisis that South Korea experienced with the declaration of martial law, or perhaps, on the contrary, does it stir up emotions?
Yes, it's very tricky, very serious situation here. Our party have a hope, wish that this trial process could be a discussion and could be a place to let every nationwide people know the truth and what is wrong and what is caused his failed the martial law bid. But the trial has been in some very tough process because the right now the ruling party and then former the opposition party, which has purged the trial and just said purge oust the former president. So I think we better proceed this trial and investigation and prosecution. Should be the very firmly based in a legal due process and legally obtain the evidence.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is we should be this whole trial have to be based on the rule of law and the due process. That's why so that we can Korean people can understand the full the situation of this martial law bid and the political turmoil after. Yes.
Yeah. Yoon Choi, thank you very much indeed. Opposition MP in South Korea on that guilty verdict in just one of the trials that the former president Yoon Suk-yeol is facing.
Venezuela's opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has told reporters that she presented the medal of her Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump at a private White House meeting on Thursday. She also said it was a historic day for Venezuelans after meeting Trump, the first time the two leaders have met in person. Trump called it a wonderful gesture of mutual respect when he posted later on social media. In the weeks after U.S. forces seized Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro in Caracas, Trump has declined to endorse Ms. Machado, whose movement claimed victory in the 2024 widely contested elections, as its new leader. He is instead dealing with the acting head of the state there, Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's former vice president. For more, I spoke to Will Grant, our Cuba correspondent, and asked him what had come out of that meeting.
Well, the most notable thing really was the fact that Maria Corina Machado gave Donald Trump her Nobel Peace Prize medal. She said that she was doing that because, or rather Donald Trump said that she had been presented with it by Machado because of all the work that he had done and that it was a wonderful gesture of mutual respect. I think the truth of the matter is it was a symbolic gesture. The Nobel organisers themselves have said that while a medal can change hands, the actual title of Nobel Peace Prize laureate obviously cannot, and they've made that very clear. But there is this suggestion that it helps sort of smooth things over between Donald Trump and Maria Corina Machado, in the sense that it's been reported, particularly in the US media, that he was resentful about the fact that she had accepted the prize instead of saying that it should have gone to Donald Trump.
And we anticipate that the interim leader will be going to Washington, but she's sending a representative there ahead of her.
For now, yes. I mean, I think it would not look at all good to her base if just the days after Nicolas Maduro had been removed from power forcibly by the United States military, then she immediately appears in Washington. So if there are to be conversations directly, for now, I think they'll be on the telephone. But you're right, ultimately there will be emissaries, particularly speaking to the Secretary of State Marco Rubio. His Cuban-American background and his knowledge of Latin America means that he is very, very up to speed with affairs in the region and clearly has a very particular take on it as a Cuban-American conservative. He wanted to see first regime change in Caracas and then subsequently potentially regime change where I'm sitting right now in Havana.
Let's turn to that because people have been paying their respects to the Cuban security officers who were killed when Nicolas Maduro was seized.
That's right, and they include 32 soldiers and security personnel, the entire personal security detail of Nicolas Maduro, who were all Cuban and were killed by the Delta Force US elite troops when they stormed then President Maduro's compound. That has been extremely painful, I think, for the Cuban Revolution. They have always sort of prided themselves on two things. One, of course, is that they can sort of go toe-to-toe with Washington. This showed just the sheer strength of US military power against Cuban troops, Cuban soldiers, and it was not a level playing field, to say the least. This is an extremely difficult time, I think, in Cuba, because it was already going through the most acute energy and economic crisis since the end of the Cold War. And you add on to that the idea that Donald Trump is pushing Delcy Rodriguez to essentially switch off the tap of Venezuelan crude oil to Cuba, and that could spell extremely difficult times ahead on the island.
Will Grant speaking to me there from Havana, Cuba.
US President Donald Trump is still weighing his options, including military strikes against Iran, after a brutal crackdown on anti-government demonstrations there. Mr. Trump had said that help was on its way to Iranian protesters, but then seemed to accept that the killing of protesters had then stopped. Meanwhile, in Iran, families of protesters have told the BBC the authorities are demanding large sums of money for the return of bodies. Yesterday on Newsday, a leading Iranian human rights group told us almost 3,500 people have been killed during more than 2 weeks of protests across the country. Some believe the real number is much higher. We can speak now to the Iranian human rights defender, Neda Sultani, who's also the author of the book My Stolen Face. Welcome to the programme. It's very difficult to get accurate information out of Iran right now. What are you hearing?
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, as you mentioned, it is very difficult to get information out of Iran because today is day 9 of an absolute internet shutdown. We are only able to get information out of the country sporadically via Starlink, which has been a lifeline for everyone outside the country and also the people inside the country. What we are hearing is unfortunately news of the massacre that happened in the last days in Iran under absolute internet shutdown unfolding. We are seeing horrific visuals of civilian protesters who have been murdered with shots, military-grade weaponry shots to their brain, to their heart, and to their genitals. And we are also hearing news of large number of detentions, arrests, and forced disappearances. We do believe strongly that the number of casualties, civilian casualty in the current uprising is way higher than 3,500. This is the number that could be verified, but as I said, there is the Starlink terminals are basically more available in large cities. We do not know exactly what has happened in smaller cities, towns, and rural areas, but we know that they were at the heart of this uprising. So we do believe, we strongly believe that the number is way higher. We are talking about somewhere between 12,000 to upward of 20,000 civilian casualties.
Those are huge and horrifying numbers. Do they indicate to you the scale of protest, the sheer number of people prepared to brave those risks, to take to the streets? Do they indicate increased level of violence in terms of the authorities' response? Perhaps both, perhaps other things?
Exactly. Definitely both. We not only saw an enormous amount of the crowds that participated in protests. I must say that currently we do not see active protests in Iran because there is basically a martial law situation across the country. We have seen the security forces with real weaponry machine guns mounted on vans, marshalling the streets and shooting indiscriminately in small groups of people, 3-4 people who are standing around the corner. So we do not see active protests, but as I said, this is because of the martial law, and this is because of the horrific number of civilian casualty. We cannot expect anybody to go on the streets when they know that AK-47s and machine guns are awaiting them outside their doors.
Does that mean that if there is to be some resolution or more momentum for the protests, it will require some sort of external action, whether from President Trump or elsewhere?
I'm afraid yes, because you cannot expect civilians, unarmed civilians, to face a regime that is armed to teeth. And we have also proof that they have imported some of their proxies, some of their Islamic militia groups from Iraq and Syria. So the people are being threatened. We know that they are raiding homes of people in search of Stalins, in search of the wounded, in search of the injured. This cannot continue. And as desperate as it may sound, because imagine who in their right mind would ask the world to attack them, to attack their country, to attack their people. But the people in Iran are so defenseless, and they are already in an active war zone. If I may, I would like to give you an example that perhaps really makes it clear for your audience and for your listeners what we are talking about. Yesterday, a news unfolded with visual proof of what had happened in the city of Rasht. Rasht is a very large, vibrant city in the northwest of Iran, and they have a bazaar where people go and do their daily shopping, vegetables, meat, egg, utensils for their home, like a place that is the heart of the daily life of people. And we saw videos that the regime starts an arson in this bazaar because protesters have taken refuge and were hiding inside the bazaar. So they started a fire and basically burned down this huge place in order to force the protesters to leave the bazaar and come out to only be greeted with machine guns and AK-47s. This is another aspect of this massacre, which I do believe we need to highlight.
Satani, thank you very much indeed. Iranian human rights defender. We don't, of course, have the Iranian government's verdict on those accusations. The MC is not allowed to report inside. Newsday on the BBC World Service with Anne in Nairobi, James in London, and Isaac in Rabat for the African Cup of Nations.
Yeah, we're on the final lap here in the African Cup of Nations in Morocco. The sun's slowly rising here in Rabat. On Sunday, this city will play host to the final of the competition between Senegal and Morocco. Of course, before that, Nigeria will take on Egypt on Saturday in Casablanca in the third place playoff. But let's talk about the final with our John Bennett, who is alongside me in our studio here. John, massive game coming up in this final. They don't tend to be the best games, African Cup of Nations finals, but I think this one should be a good one.
Yeah, hopefully. I'm looking back at all the finals that I've covered. So 2012, 0-0, 2013, 1-0, 2017, 2-1. We had a 1-0, 0-0, 2-1. Yeah, they're not very high scoring, the finals. But on paper, we have the two best teams, and we have a Morocco side who have an X-factor player in Brahim Diaz, who scored 5 goals at this tournament. We have Senegal, who have a number of X-factor players, including, I think, the guy who's going to be the future of African football, who's a super sub at the moment because he's only 17, plays for Paris Saint-Germain. He's called Ibrahim Mbaye. But I think he will get a cameo as a sub during the game. They have so many attacking players, and the one everyone is talking about is Sadio Mane, who's going to play his final African Cup of Nations match.
Yeah, he mentioned that at the press conference against Egypt. His legacy I feel like it was already cemented, but he added to it with that semi-final moment, because Egypt was such a difficult team to break down, and just that moment of quality.
Yeah, coming up with the winning moment again, as he has on all three of those big occasions against Egypt. So he has this rivalry, of course, in international football with Mohamed Salah, and he came out on top again. And he has been criticised a lot, Sadio Mane. I think last year he called himself the most criticised footballer in Senegal. So to come out and prove that he's still at the top level, because of course he plays in Saudi Arabia now. He's probably not the same player he was when he was at Liverpool, but he can still deliver in those big moments, and that's why he's still so vital for Senegal, and he'll still be crucial in this final.
Do you think they go into the match because Morocco are the hosts, and we've heard about the pressure that's been on the coach for Morocco, Walid Regragui, how much pressure he's been under? Do you think they go into the game kind of going, do you know what, this is a free hit for us, almost?
I'm not sure about free hit, but I don't think they'll be feeling fazed by the fans or intimidated by the supporters. Morocco will again call on their fans to be the 12th man. Walid Regragui appealed to them before the semi-final. Please, I need more from you. I don't think he was happy that they were giving everything that they can. I think they did give everything at the semi-final. They really...
capital Seoul. It broke out in a slum area bordering the exclusive Gangnam district. BBC News.
Thank you for that news. Hello and welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service, live from London with James Cognall, and from Nairobi with me, Anne Soy.
Hi Anne, in this half hour we're going to get the latest on the protests in Iran and the elections in Uganda, and we'll be live in Rabat in Morocco. Isaac Fannin of Newsday is there, looking ahead to the final of the Africa Cup of Nations.
As James mentioned there, we begin in Iran. Families of people killed in the protests have told the BBC that the authorities are demanding large sums of money to return their bodies for burial. Yesterday on Newsday, a leading Iranian human rights activist told us that almost 3,500 people have been killed during more than 2 weeks of protests across the country. The US president has been ramping up pressure, threatening to intervene militarily. But in the last day or so, he has appeared to lower his rhetoric, saying yesterday that the killings and executions had stopped. One case that garnered a lot of attention globally was that of Irfan Sultani. He was arrested on the 8th of this month. Days later, the authorities informed his family his execution had been scheduled for Wednesday. But under pressure from the US, the execution was postponed. This was a relative of Irfan speaking to the BBC.
Chera Irfan? Why Irfan? Because the government are trying to create suppression through the death penalty. They want to scare people to think them being against them. There's governmental suppression by shutting people down and quieting them. Why else would they want to take him away for no reason and to give him this verdict? There's loads of Irfans. It's not just one Irfan. This is the only way that the government can suppress these protests.
Well, our chief international correspondent, Liz Doucette, was just listening to that testimony, or to that clip from a relative of Irfan Sultani. Now, Liz, we have seen a crackdown. There have been quite a number of crackdowns on protests. There are protests every couple of years in Iran. But have we seen anything quite like this before?
This wave of protest, which is unique in many ways from the last waves of protest, has provoked, as you say, also an unprecedented crackdown. The internet blackout, which is in its second week, has gone on longer and is tighter than used, and even the legal force has been much more ferocious than at previous times, and it happened much more quickly. Both the intensity of these protests and also the speed of their escalation, that within less than 3 weeks there were strikes and protests, people marching through the streets in the bitter cold in every corner of Iran. And so the authorities, after initially saying we will have dialogue about your legitimate economic demands, they took certain steps, quite significant steps on the economic front, realized that this was not taking the heat out of the protest. So they resorted to their own playbook, they updated it, and came down really hard. And while we are still only getting a very partial picture from Iran because of this blackout, still enough is emerging to tell us a lot, and that is that the streets, which had been filled with the roars of call for change, seem to have largely been empty. People have been chanting from their homes and watching and waiting to see what comes next.
And what's your assessment of what's likely to come next? There has been a deadly crackdown. People are staying in their homes now, as you say. Are they likely to come out again to the streets?
Unlikely, although it has to be emphasized that moments like this are always unpredictable and always fraught with peril. People understand now that if they go onto the streets, there will be consequences. There have been these images of open-air morgues with families searching. Of course, you think it was a parking lot, but it's full of these black body bags, and even state TV showed images like this. Of course, they blamed the deaths on the protesters on that these people were killed by terrorists and troublemakers. But one Iranian journalist had said to me that we have to have a death wish to go into the streets now. all eyes had turned to President Trump because, of course, he has an oversized voice in this and had said 2 days ago, help is on its way. And, of course, he said it after the protest had all but died down. And we've been reporting on your program how yesterday he seemed to pull back from what seemed, with all of the cautionary steps being taken, U.S. and UK military personnel pulling out of the biggest U.S. military base in the Middle East, British embassy closing in Tehran, other countries saying to their nationals to leave Iran. It all seemed that this was this drumbeat that you see time and again, a build-up toward military action, and then President Trump said, well, the killings have stopped, the hangings have stopped, we're just going to keep an eye on it, nothing's off the table, but no action for now, at least not the military action.
Well, we put that question about President Trump saying that he'd been assured that the killings had stopped and the executions as well. We put that question to the human rights activist who's Iranian living in Norway, but he wasn't convinced that the government of President Pezeshkian really has the kind of authority to give such kind of a reassurance, and saying that he goes by the word of the head of the Supreme Court. Where do we stand on this?
Pezeshkian, the elected president of Iran, is not the man who literally calls the shots. He's the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and is a very powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard. Those are the people who will be trying to decide what Iran does and does not do. There have been reports that even some of President Trump's officials were taken aback when he came up with this line. And another line which has gotten less attention but is almost more important was President Trump at that press conference in Washington said that he said that the shots were being fired by the security forces, but that the protesters themselves were shooting back. In other words, he seemed to be saying what the Iranian government was saying, was that the protesters were armed, and that therefore some of the violence was coming from them. Where did that information? Who was talking to President Trump? There's always enterprises. We've seen this time and again in Ukraine, that President Trump hears sometimes from one week to the next, and he seems to espouse a view that times are when the Russians are saying they want war in other days, but the Ukrainians have been saying they want war, the Europeans. And what is becoming clear is that there was quite a significant push by his really important allies in the Gulf countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, as well as Oman, Egypt. They basically said, don't attack Iran. And we saw how the voices of these Gulf allies during the Gaza war really pushed President Trump to be much more forceful in calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. He hasn't said this, but it seems this is what has caused him to pull back at least for the moment. There have also been reports that Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, for very different reasons, has asked President Trump to wait a moment. The reporting from Israel was that the Israelis didn't feel there was enough military access to the region. And of course, bear in mind that President Trump doesn't want a long war. Something short and sharp which resolves the situation. And it's probably been made clear that just simply a few military strikes is not going to bring down the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sentinel, Chief International Correspondent there.
This is Newsday on the BBC World Service. Let's head to Uganda, where votes are being counted from yesterday's presidential and parliamentary elections. President Yoweri Museveni has been in power for 4 decades. He's facing 7 challenges, most notably the singer-turned-politician Bobi Wine, real name Robert Chagulanyi. And already we have some early results being released by the country's electoral commission. So let's head to Kampala and speak to the BBC's Sami Awami. Sami, tell us about these results.
Yes, like you said, we are still waiting for official results from the polling center. Obviously, individual polling stations across the country have been sending their ballot papers to the central tallying center, and the center is putting together these numbers. But obviously, there are over 50,000 maybe polling stations across the country, so it's going to take a little while before we get a good sense of who's really is internet shutdown ongoing here. So the internet was shut down on Tuesday. For the last 2 days here at the hotel where I was staying, at least we were somehow privileged or lucky to still have a bit of wireless, so we could at least, get reports from everywhere. But since last night, where wireless was also shut down, so it's absolutely dark. We can't know exactly what's going on or the mood across the country at the moment.
Sure, yeah. Well, as you say, very difficult to establish what exactly is going on because of that. Reuters are quoting the Electoral Commission as saying that that President Museveni, the incumbent, has a 76.25% of the vote based on tallies from nearly half of the polling stations, and Bobi Wine has a touch under 20%. The remaining votes split among 600 candidates. So that's what Reuters News agency is telling us based on what they say is the Electoral Commission's announcements. Give us an update on, we've heard from Bobi Wine suggesting that there have been electoral irregularities. Has he produced any proof of that?
Well, not officially or concretely, at least from different polling stations. I mean, figures there you're quoting have been like that since last night, I believe. So it seems like that gap has continued to go on. But from supporters, the supporters of the opposition have been sharing videos, for instance, of showing what they claim to be evidence of electoral rigging, electoral malfunction. For instance, there are some videos show like a booklet of votes or taking 7 supporters. They're saying that they have elected him. There's just been all these rumors and suggestions from users of social media. It is exactly those kind of concerns that the authorities here believed would cause panic and instability in the country. That's why they decided to shut down the internet. But again, because voting has just started yesterday, but also even before the vote started, we had concerns and suspicions from the opposition early on, saying that this system was designed, the electoral system was designed in favor of the president. They even blamed the machine malfunction yesterday as part of that ploy the election and restrict exposing all these human rights violations. So we're waiting to get official evidence maybe from the opposition as to why they believe the election has been rigged.
Sammy, just give us a sense of what Kampala is like right now. Does it feel calm? Does it feel tense? How is it?
It is very calm. I mean, even yesterday, just the voting day, the streets were unusually empty and peaceful. Contrary actually to what we saw, for instance, over the weekend, where there was a huge presence of security officers roaming around with armored vehicles and stuff. But since yesterday, I mean, there are police officers and militarymen in different corners of Kampala, but generally the streets are quite calm, and I believe people are waiting to see what will happen after the official results have been announced.
Sambil, correspondent in Kampala. Thank you very much indeed.
You're listening to Newsday from the BBC with James and Anne. A reminder now of the main headlines this hour. A South Korean court has found the former president Yoon Suk-yeol guilty of obstructing justice and abuse of power in the first of several cases over his imposition of martial law, sentencing him to 5 years in prison. The Venezuelan leader, Maria Corina Machado, has given her Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump, but there's no sign she secured his backing as the country's next leader. And China's President Xi Jinping has hailed a turnaround in ties during a visit by the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney.
Now let's head over to Rabat in Morocco. Isaac Fan has got sports.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time here in Rabat. The excitement is building. The final of the Africa Cup of Nations this weekend. It's going to be an intriguing matchup. Senegal coming here to Rabat, having played all of their matches in Tangier. They will take on the hosts Morocco on Sunday. I told you about the joyous celebrations that were sparked across the country after the hosts beat Nigeria on penalties on Wednesday. We're going to hear from a couple of fans now. First, a Moroccan.
Hi, my name is Ala. Looking back at what we were expecting before the tournament. I think it really lived up to the hype, and we gave all the African teams and supporters the space and the atmosphere that was needed to create a beautiful tournament. And I personally made several trips back and forth from Marrakesh to see a couple games. And it wasn't easy at all. I mean, the long drives, the late nights, and work the next day, but it was worth every single moment, and you could feel it was a continental celebration. As a Moroccan, I think we showed real hospitality, and hosting Africa is something that we can really be proud of beyond the result, because I mean, now we are looking at the final game, but whatever happens, I think Morocco already won.
Hello to the entire radio team. My name is Boy Maroon, better known as Yamusafa. I'm a Senegalese influencer and content creator at the same time as the supporter of Senegal national team. Frankly, here in Tanja, we are preparing this finale like a real national holiday. The lion jerseys are already ready. The flag are out of the neighborhoods, and everyone is talking about the Senegal-Morocco match since our victory against Egypt. For our part, as an ardent supporter, the days are numbered. Senegal and Morocco are brothers' country, and we will play the game in fair play and may the best win. In Senegal, we organize ourselves with friends and family. We prepare food, tea, tuba, coffee, and everyone is looking for a good place to follow the game. There is a lot of respect for Morocco, but we have confidence in our players. The Lions are focused. The people are behind them. And we hope to finish this African Cup in style. May the best win. And Senegal go. Allez Senegal, allez Senegal.
Yeah, two fans there. We know how important the fans are going to be for Sunday's final. John Bennett is back alongside me. John, you were at that semi-final with Rabat featuring Morocco and Nigeria. Just how important were the fans in getting them over the line?
They were, and I think they listened to the appeal of their manager, who, as we said earlier in the hour, was slightly disappointed with the way that they had been throughout the tournament. I think disappointed is probably a strong word, but he wanted more from them. It was that cliche of being the 12th man, and we're in Rabat, and you've experienced it as well, Isaac. It's quite a relaxed, laid-back city compared to other cities around Morocco. I think it would be a lot different if we were playing the matches in Casablanca or Marrakesh. If the final was taking place there, it would be a different atmosphere. It would be a raucous atmosphere. I think here the fans probably need to have something to get them going, so they need the team to perform before they get going. But they were superb in the semi-final, to be honest, particularly behind both goals, where you get the Moroccan version of the ultras. I thought they really got behind the team, and when the team needed them, that they really had that support.
It was interesting you say that, because obviously we've heard from some Moroccan fans earlier on in the few weeks that I've been here. There were some who were kind of complaining about the fact that Morocco's games have all been in Rabat, which has probably helped the team, but then it hasn't given, you know, fans from other cities. And we know Casablanca, for example, with their two massive teams in Wydad and Raja, they've got huge followings. The way in which they support their team, very vibrant. It would have been perhaps a different story if they played games there.
Yeah, it's helped the team because they are based in this amazing complex, which is about 20 minutes drive away from where we are now, 20 minutes drive away from where the stadium is, and it's a training ground, but also the headquarters of Moroccan football, and the players have their own hotel rooms there. They just walk out to training. Everything is there for them, so they've been really settled. They haven't had to travel around, haven't had to move around. But you're right, I think we probably would have had a better atmosphere in other cities. And you were telling me, Isaac, that the celebrations where you are in Tangier for the game that took place in Rabat seemed a lot more lively than they were in Rabat. When I was driving back from the stadium, I was expecting a lot more on the streets. I didn't really see it, but you saw a lot more on the
Yeah, it was crazy outside of my hotel room in Tangier. There was a little roundabout outside the main train station there, and it was chock-a-block with cars. There were police officers trying to usher cars through, but they were honking their horns. People were like lighting fireworks in the middle of the street. It was an actual party taking place, like a carnival.
It was a lot less lively here, I have to say. We did drive out of the stadium quite late after the game because we waited for interviews, but still I expected a bit more. I even spoke to a couple of journalists covering the game on Sunday. They were thinking of covering it from Casablanca or Marrakesh because they want to get a real feel of how Moroccan people are feeling about it. Maybe it's because it's a lot more relaxed in Rabat. You don't get that feel of the passion. But still, inside the stadium, the 65,000 fans, that is one of the loudest atmospheres I've experienced in world football. It's an incredible stadium.
Yeah, no doubt it will be even louder on Sunday when the Senegalese fans come from Tangier. I want to talk about this competition so far. What have you made of the competition in general? The highest scoring edition ever, 120 goals.
Yeah, the main thing for me is that it's real the quality to the fore. The best players and the best teams have been able to perform. Why have they been able to perform? The pitches have been fantastic, so that hasn't been a leveller. So we haven't seen many underdog stories because of that. The temperatures, it hasn't been hot here. It's been very comfortable. It's been like the conditions that the players who come over from Europe were playing week in, week out. So that hasn't been difficult. Morocco coach said 2 years ago we had to play in Ivory Coast at lunchtime when it was getting towards late 30 degrees Celsius. How can you expect us to be at our best? Here we can be at our best. And also in terms of the infrastructure, the players have been able to stay in hotels. Each team has had a separate hotel. It's the first time that's happened. And the likes of Sadio Mane hasn't had to travel a lot as well. So the travel has been easy. When you've had to travel, it's been easy, it's been comfortable, and that has made a difference. It's meant that we've had less underdog stories, which is a shame in a way because that's synonymous with AFCON, but it's also meant that the big teams, the big players have been able to perform. For example, in the semi-finals we had all the African footballers of the year since 2017, 5 of them, and you think to the quarter-finals we had 7 past winners out of 8, and all the top seeds as well. Yeah, what's your standout from the last few weeks?
I think for me, the Senegalese fans in Tangier, the way in which they've kind of made that city their home, it was really, really amazing to see. Moroccans were really, really taking to them. Every time I kind of was walking the street, people were asking, "Oh, are you from Senegal?" And they really, really, had a really good relationship with those fans, and I think the fact that they're playing each other in the final kind of adds to that a little bit, because I think of course Moroccans will be desperate to end that 50-year kind of wait, but they will also not be upset if Senegal, they will be upset if Senegal win, but it won't be as painful if it was another team, maybe a rival.
There was amazing pictures. Did you see them on social media? The video of Senegal going back to their team hotel, and all the staff came out firing fireworks out and really welcoming them back, dancing. I'm wondering if they're going to have mixed feelings in the final. The Moroccan staff in that hotel, they're going to be partly hoping that Senegal do well, because they've really got to know them over the last 4 weeks.
They really have, and you were saying that you were intrigued about the lack of underdogs so far in this competition.
Yeah, that's right. I just listened to John there saying that there was a lack of underdogs, and I remember from the quarterfinals, it was all the continent's heavyweights making it there. I was hoping for a repeat of 2012 when we have a surprise like Zambia.
Yeah.
Why is there a lack of underdogs? Why do you think that's happened?
I agree with you. I would have liked one underdog story. I remember before the tournament, lots of people asking me who's going to be the surprise team, and we wondered who that would be. Every time there is a surprise. Mozambique did pretty well, didn't they, getting to the last 16? I thought they performed well, but then were disappointing against Nigeria in the last 16. I honestly think it's to do with the conditions. I think it's the pitches and the temperatures. That's the main thing. I really think that the best players and the best teams have been able to perform at their highest level at this tournament. There's been nothing that has meant that there's levelling in conditions. Do you agree, Isaac?
Yeah, I totally agree that the pitches have been fantastic, and I think the conditions, it's been, like you say, playing in Europe, it's actually been kind of cold here, which is not what you expect when you talk about Africa Cup of Nations.
And John, this is James in the studio. I had a question too. I was out at the start of the tournament, and one of the things Moroccans were talking about a lot was, yes, it's amazing having the Africa Cup of Nations, but this is also all part of building towards joint hosting the World Cup in 2030. Are you fairly optimistic about the sort of show Morocco would be able to put on?
I think so, particularly around the stadiums. The stadium is one of the best I've experienced. The stadium here I've experienced in world football. It is, when you walk in, the first thing I thought, this is like being at a World Cup. This is up there with the World Cup stadiums I've been at. The first thing I thought of was being at the Brazil World Cup in in 2014, wasn't it? When I walked into the stadium they have there in Brasilia. An unbelievable stadium. I think the hotels as well, all the teams have been talking about how good the hotels have been as well. The welcome has been superb because we can't forget, and you'll know about this, James, there were protests, weren't there, last year from people here in Morocco because of the amount of money spent on the competition, so I wondered if there would be a bit more of that, but the welcome, the positivity in the streets, the special AFCON welcome has definitely been here. So yeah, I think they will be optimistic, the organisers, that they can host that World Cup really well.
I did hear one funny story about that, so just to jump in, but with someone I know, a relative wasn't going to go to any of the games at the African Cup of Nations as a protest, can't go, spend too much money on it. Now that person has an opportunity to go to the final. There
It helps having a team doing well in the competition, I think.
Yeah, when the hosts do well, it always lifts the competition. Like Ivory Coast 2 years ago, we could have back-to-back hosts winning as well.
Yeah, it will be fantastic if Morocco were to win at home. I am sure the streets will come alive if Morocco are to win the African Cup of Nations. Of course, on Monday we will bring you all the reaction from that huge match here in Rabat. Can Morocco end 50 years with her? Can Sadio Mane win a second African Cup of Nations title? So many intriguing storylines. Make sure you join us on Monday and we'll bring you reaction from that.
Celestine Kujabi says, yes, Alele Lyon, Senegal can make it. And George Brooks says, both countries have quality players. So we will be waiting for the updates from Isaac. That's it from Newsday, from us and the team. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Houston Public Media is a service of the University of Houston and is supported with your gifts to the Houston Public Media Foundation. More information available online at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate.
Travel is one of life's great rewards, and there's always something new to see and experience when you travel the world like I do. Hi, I'm Rick Stevens. Join me as we invent a week. Each week, we'll travel with Rick Stevens. Together, we'll explore fascinating sights, discover amazing food, make new friends from near and far, and read history as part of the week. Join us for Travel with Rick Stevens.
Saturdays at 6 a.m. on News 88.7.
This is your NPR station, KUHF Houston, News 88.7, service of the University of Houston. Get local breaking news anytime at HoustonPublicMedia.org. Listen to us on your favorite devices. Tell your smart speaker to play News 88.7.
After the news, stay tuned for the science show that takes us inspiration from the headlines. This one comes here from Studio in Sydney, Australia. So, the obvious move was to take up a series on science making it big in this part of the world. Talking of big, we out and about exploring Tasmania's giant eucalyptus trees. As recent wildfires in the state of Victoria have burned 400,000 hectares, we asked why an indigenous tree has extra flammable features. We'll also be looking at Tasmania's devils 30 years into a contagious cancer outbreak that has devastated the population. Could a cutting-edge vaccine, a length of plastic tubing and some facial recognition from marsupials be the salvation these devils need? Plus, 1 month into Australia's controversial social media ban, we check in with the kids affected. Is it making a difference? The former president of Sambil has been convicted of a series of charges over his failed attempt to replace national justice. They include abuse of power and obstruction of justice. The court sentenced him to 5 years in jail. One is outside the court in Seoul.
Yoon Suk-yeol sat motionlessly as the judge read out the verdicts. He said Yoon had turned his back on the constitution he had sworn to protect. The former president had denied the charges, which included declaring martial law in 2024 without consulting his cabinet and ordering the presidential guard to prevent his arrest. He is still facing several more trials, including on charges of leading an insurrection, for which prosecutors are seeking the death penalty, though in practice, this is never carried out.
The Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has given her Nobel Peace Prize medal to President Donald Trump at a meeting in the White House. She said it was a recognition of his unique commitment to Venezuela's freedom. Mr. Trump posted on social media that it was a gesture of mutual respect and thanked her. No other details of the meeting were made public. Since US forces seized President Nicolas Maduro in Caracas, Mr. Trump has declined to endorse Ms. Machado as Venezuela's new leader. President Xi Jinping has expressed optimism about China's improving ties with Canada. He was speaking as he hosted talks in Beijing with the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Mr. Carney is facing a difficult balancing act after years of strained relations with China. He's under pressure to boost trade without angering the US. Stephen McDonald is in Beijing.
Apart from these big picture meetings, on the sidelines, they are negotiating, well, to attempt to work out a way that China can sell more electric vehicles into Canada. And that means reducing tariffs on those cars, which Canada, just like the US and Europe, had placed on China's EVs, accusing Beijing of artificially propping up these industries. Now, if that can be worked out, China's going to buy more raw materials. China's going to buy more agricultural products.
The United States and Taiwan have reached a trade agreement that reduces import taxes on goods from Japan, while increasing Taiwan's technology investment in the United States. Here's our North American business correspondent,
It's a win for the United States, which is looking to boost manufacturing of semiconductors with the aim of eventually becoming self-sufficient. The investment by Taiwanese semiconductor and technology companies will help achieve the U.S. goal of bringing 40% of Taiwan's building capacity to the U.S. So, what does Taiwan get in return? Well, it gets a big reprieve from the Trump administration's reciprocal tariffs, which will now be capped at 15%.
ABC News. Protests have continued over the presence of thousands of masked and armed immigration officials in the U.S. city of Minneapolis, despite a threat by President Trump to invoke the centuries-old Insurrection Act. The focus for the protests has been federal security agents, one of whom was shot and dead last week. Mr. Trump criticised local Democratic leaders for failing to stop what he called professional agitators from committing insurrection. Early results from Thursday's presidential election in Uganda say President Yoweri Museveni has a big lead over his main rival, Bobi Wine. The Electoral Commission said partial results gave Mr. Museveni, who's seeking a seventh successive term, about 76% of the vote so far, with Bobi Wine on about 20%. Bobi Wine had already accused the government of ballot stuffing, though without presenting any evidence. Scientists have developed a new map of the land beneath Antarctica's ice sheet, revealing thousands of previously undiscovered hills and ridges. Here's our climate reporter, Mark Pointing.
We've known about Antarctica's major mountain ranges and landforms for a long time, but the new map reveals tens of thousands of previously undiscovered hills and ridges, as well as providing greater detail than ever before of some of those mountains and canyons buried under the ice. All of this is important because those ridges, mountains and channels on Antarctica's bed shape how fast the glaciers above move, and understanding the topography could help scientists work out how quickly the ice might retreat in a warming climate.
The Spanish singer Julio Iglesias has denied the allegations of rape and other sexual abuse made against him by two of his former employees. He said on social media that the allegations against him were absolutely false and he had never abused a woman. The abuses were said to have taken place in 2021 at his mansion in the Dominican Republic. Spanish government officials have called for an investigation. ABC News.
So, this weekend, I spent a glorious day hunting in the Tasmanian mountains. My prey was stationary and at least 60 metres tall. So, you'd think there wouldn't be much of a challenge, but it turns out that sometimes the best place to hide a giant Eucalyptus regnans, the world's largest flowering plant, is in a forest full of other trees. There's something intoxicating about making contact with another living being that predates the Industrial Revolution, and my target was powerless to resist as I went in for a hug. But I wasn't the only one doing some successful hunting that day. I was also the quarry, the victim for some other successful hunters. 2 leeches and 4 ticks all decided that I was a delicious meal. I'm Marnie Chesterton, and from the BBC World Service, this is Unexpected Elements. Regular listeners will know Unexpected Elements as the show that looks for the science inspired by a news headline. And as ever, I'm joined by some tip-top science broadcasters to discuss our findings, often representing 3 different continents. But today, all in person in a studio with me, which is a rare treat. So let's introduce them. To my right, Australian Katie Silver, formerly BBC's tech specialist in Singapore, soon to be our woman in Mexico. Welcome, Katie.
Thanks, Marnie. So nice to meet you face to face.
Yeah, finally. She's normally a disembodied screen. On my other side, science editor at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, Jonathan Webb. Welcome to the show.
It's such a pleasure to be here, Marnie, and nice to see you too.
Well, welcome. One of the famous lines about Australia is that it's a beautiful country where all the wildlife is trying to kill you. And since you're both locals, I just have to check, is that hyperbole to keep all the tourists away? Or do either of you have war stories about dangerous run-ins with, I don't know, snakes or spiders or sharks? You're both nodding.
I think you just get used to seeing them. And the other day, for example, there was a very crazy-looking flying cockroach wasp thing in the shower, which did not bother me in the slightest. I just showered around it. But my partner, who was British and visiting, he couldn't shower for like 3 days because he was too petrified by it, which I didn't know. And so of course, it was me getting the spray because we're just very nonplussed by these things.
Yeah, you definitely get used to it. And I definitely, growing up in Adelaide, had some war stories. The most common snake you would find in a backyard was an eastern brown snake, which look pretty innocuous but are extremely deadly. We had 2 cats, and each of them, when I was growing up, was bitten twice and saved by an expensive anti-venom and like halfway paralysed by the time we found them and stuff. So yeah, don't muck around with the snakes in particular, but it's still a beautiful place to come and visit, and really, you're going to be fine.
Thank you for the reassurance. So normally this is a show that takes something that's been in the news and then we look for unexpected science stories around it. This week, we thought we'd do something a little bit different. Take a listen to this.
G'day! Are you okay there?
A rich, booming country on the edge of Asia.
I mean, we love kangaroos and so, but also, you know, there's a lot of them around.
And Australia, as you know, the drama of the Ashes.
It's not just cricket and kangaroos.
Bush and beach-loving culture.
It's hard to keep your clothes on during the Australian summer because it's so darn hot.
A biodiversity hotspot, lots and lots of unique animals all living together, not found anywhere else in the world.
If you think you know Australia, think again.
That's right. Since Unexpected Elements is coming to you from, for me, the other side of the planet, I thought that rather than picking a headline to inspire us, we should just spend the entire show focusing on the Australian stories hitting the headlines here, the ones with science to share with our global audience. And there's plenty to come, so expect tales of the tree that seems to add fuel to the current wildfires and the world-leading approach that Australia has taken to restricting social media for kids. How are scientists monitoring this national experiment? But let's start with the story of the history of this island. So Australia is known for its unusual wildlife, as we've established, iconic species that often don't live anywhere else. Why are they so different? Jonathan, you've been looking into this for us, right?
I have. In particular, I've been looking into the marsupials, but I do think there are amazing animals here in Australia, and it's easy to think of them as being weird or exotic or different, but actually I think a lot of that comes from the kind of Eurocentric gaze that people brought when Europeans colonised Australia. And it is an isolated continent, but it wasn't always, and that's part of the story here of why we ended up as a marsupial hotbed in particular.
Well, let's start with what is a marsupial.
So when you think of an iconic Australian animal, chances are it's a marsupial, right? The kangaroos, the koalas, lots of them are marsupials because they have a pouch. And if it's a mum, it might have a baby in the pouch. But actually what that points to is quite a unique reproductive strategy, which is very different from other mammals, which we know as placental mammals like us, which give birth to quite advanced, quite developed live young. If you're a marsupial, you have a very tiny remnant of a placenta and you spend very little time growing your baby inside your womb. You basically pop it out when it's tiny, like a pea or a peanut. This pink little embryonic thing, which then is out in the world, but it crawls into your pouch. And it keeps growing in there until it looks much more like a grown-up. And that gives them quite a lot of advantages and may explain why they have adapted so well and dominated so much in Australia, because when times are lean, they can kind of dial back the reproduction. When times are good, they can get going quite fast and have quite a lot of babies quite quickly and rear them in the pouch without having to give birth to them, grow them to quite a large size and pop them out one at a time. They actually first evolved, we associate them strongly with Australia, but North America, 125 million years ago, is kind of the first marsupial, that first kind of branching from the placental mammals. And we don't know exactly why, but they seem to do quite well for a while there in North America. They're all extinct now, species. And then about 66 million years ago, for the paleontology nerds, that may be familiar, that's when an asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs. Around about that time, they made their way to South America, and there they boomed. They really diversified. And then, within 10 million years after that, we have evidence of them in Australia, which seems improbable, but when you dial the clock back, there was a land link between South America and Australia, because we were both still attached to Antarctica, and Antarctica was not frozen, it was covered in kind of cool but temperate forests, and so the marsupials made their way to the Australian continent, where they boomed and diversified again into some of the amazing creatures we have today.
Jonathan, wasn't there a poll recently about Australia's favourite marsupial?
It wasn't favourite marsupial, but yes, we have a thing called National Science Week here in Australia, and at the ABC we tend to run a big project and get people involved in science in some way, or in this case just voting. And the question was, what is Australia's most underrated animal? The animal that actually won was a rodent, and in particular the native water rat, which is known as the ricali, which has webbed back feet and swims around in rivers all around the country. Really cute animal. That won the vote.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now, talking of marsupials, I couldn't come to Australia without meeting probably one of the most iconic ones. I was in Tasmania and I got to see the largest carnivorous marsupial, the Tasmanian devil. I'm assuming, Katie, Jonathan, you two know all about this critter.
Jonathan's more of an animal guy than me by the sounds of it, so you go, Jonathan.
I've never seen one in person, but I am very aware of the Tasmanian devil. Very cute, but quite aggressive and at risk, famously, from a cancer that they spread from one snout to another.
Oh, exactly. So for listeners that have never seen one, imagine